Hey everyone, and welcome to The Explainer. Today, I want you to picture this. It's August 15th, 1947. India has just woken up to a brand new dawn of freedom. After a grueling 200 years of British rule, the citizens of this newly independent nation were finally the masters of their own destiny. But, as you can imagine, with that incredible freedom came a truly monumental task. The immense, and I mean massive, job of nation building was now squarely in their hands.
So how do you build an economy from scratch? Seriously, I want you to imagine inheriting a country and having to decide, practically from a blank canvas, how to run the whole thing. How do you feed, employ, and just generally improve the lives of millions of people who have been left completely impoverished by centuries of colonial rule? You literally have to build an entire economic system from the ground up, knowing that every single choice you make is going to impact generations to come. No pressure, right? Okay, let's dive right into our roadmap for today. We're going to cover 1. Dawn of a new economy. 2. The architect and blueprint. 3. 4 pillars of planning. 4. Reforming the land. 5. The Green Revolution. And finally, 6. The Great Subsidy Debate.
Starting with Section 1, Dawn of a New Economy. Let's look at the very first major hurdle independent India faced. The leaders of the country had to choose an economic operating system. They needed a framework that would actually promote the welfare of all citizens, not just a privileged few. You see, every society on Earth has to answer 3 basic questions: what to produce, how to produce it, and how to distribute it. Under capitalism, these questions are answered by market forces and purchasing power. Basically, goods are distributed based on who actually has the money to buy them. But on the flip side, under socialism, the government decides what is produced and how it's distributed based strictly on what it determines the society needs, typically with no private property allowed at all.
Now, while leaders like Jawaharlal Nehru really sympathized with that socialist outlook, they knew that an extreme version like the Soviet model, which completely abolished private property, well, it just wouldn't work in a sprawling democracy like India. So they sought a middle path. They opted for what's called a mixed economy. In this system, the market provides whatever goods and services it can produce efficiently, and the government steps in to provide the essential stuff that the market fails to deliver. So you get a strong public sector, but you also keep private property rights. The best of both worlds, essentially. Moving on to Section 2, the architect and blueprint. Once they had the mixed economy locked in as their operating system, India needed a roadmap. And this brings us to the famous era of the 5-year plans, which was actually a concept initially borrowed from the Soviet Union. This era officially kicked off in 1950 when they created the Planning Commission, which was chaired by the Prime Minister.
And guys, the stakes here were unbelievably high. The first 5-year plan stated its central objective was, and I quote, to initiate a process of development which will raise the living standards and open out to the people new opportunities for a richer and more varied life. This wasn't just some dry bureaucratic exercise of moving money around on a spreadsheet. This was a master blueprint meant to literally lift an entire nation into a better existence. And, you really can't talk about these blueprints without talking about the main architect behind them. Prasanta Chandra Mahalanobis was a downright brilliant statistician. He gained international fame and founded the highly prestigious Indian Statistical Institute. He's the guy who formulated the landmark second 5-year plan, laying down the core ideas for India's economic goals. And what made him such a great scholar was his open-mindedness. He actively invited economists from all over the globe, including his absolute harshest critics, to come advise him on India's economic progress.
Which brings us to Section 3, 4 pillars of planning. So what exactly went into these plans? Well, macro-level planning is a really tough balancing act. Because resources are always limited, hard choices have to be made in every single 5-year plan about what gets priority. But the planners made sure that all their policies revolved around 4 distinct, unwavering goals.
Those 4 pillars are growth, modernization, self-reliance, and equity. Planners had to carefully navigate these because, believe it or not, sometimes these goals could actually conflict with one another. Let's break them down real quick to see how they guided the nation's trajectory.
First up is growth. This simply means increasing the country's capacity to produce goods and services. I love this analogy. Think of the GDP as a cake. Economic growth just means baking a much larger cake. If the cake is larger, more people in the country can get a slice, which leads directly to that richer, more varied life we talked about earlier. The second pillar is modernization. Now, sure, this means adopting new technologies, like using better seeds on a farm or putting new efficient machines in a factory, but it goes way deeper than just tech. Modernization also requires a massive shift in social outlook. A perfect example, recognizing that women have the exact same rights and talents as men, and then actually utilizing those talents in banks, factories, and schools to build a more prosperous society. It's a total mindset shift. The final two pillars really go hand in hand. Self-reliance was absolutely crucial for a newly freed nation. India desperately wanted to avoid importing foreign goods, especially food, to make sure its sovereignty wasn't vulnerable to outside interference. But here's the catch. Self-reliance and growth mean absolutely nothing without equity. A country can have sky-high growth and the most modern technology in the world, but if the vast majority of its people are still living in poverty, well, the plan has failed. Equity is what ensures the benefits of prosperity actually reach the poor, allowing everyone to meet basic needs like food, housing, and education.
Let's move to Section 4, Reforming the Land. Now that we understand the blueprint, let's pivot and look at how this actually played out on the ground. We have to start with agriculture. At the time of independence, a staggering 75% of the population depended on agriculture for their livelihood. Yet, productivity was incredibly low. It had been bottlenecked by colonial systems that had basically neglected the farmers for decades.
To achieve any kind of equity in agriculture, massive land reforms were needed to completely change who owned what. Step one was abolishing the intermediaries, like the zamindars. These are folks who just collected rent without contributing a single thing to improving the farms. Stripping their power brought something like 200 lakh tenants into direct contact with the government. Step two was implementing land ceilings. This fixed a hard maximum on the size of land any one individual could own, which was a bold attempt to break up huge concentrations of wealth. And the whole crux of this land-to-the-tiller policy relies on one simple human truth: incentive. There's this wild story about farmers in the former Soviet Union who used to intentionally pack rotten fruits right alongside the fresh ones in boxes for sale, completely guaranteeing the whole batch would spoil. Why on earth would they do that? Because they didn't own the land. They didn't get to keep the profits, and they didn't suffer the losses. Giving the actual tillers ownership of the land gives them the ultimate incentive to invest in it, care for the crops, and actually increase their output.
But, as you might expect, the reality of implementing these reforms was incredibly messy. Big landlords weren't just going to give up their land. They challenged the ceiling legislation in courts just to buy time. They'd register land under close relatives to escape the rules. They exploited every legal loophole they could find. And in many tragic cases, they outright evicted their tenants while falsely claiming to be the actual tillers of the land themselves. So while states like Kerala and West Bengal successfully executed these reforms because they had highly committed governments, vast inequalities in landholding sadly just continued on elsewhere.
All right, Section 5, the Green Revolution. Even with all those land reform hurdles, India's agriculture still faced a massive physical limitation. It relied almost entirely on the monsoon rains. If the monsoons fell short, the farmers were in deep, deep trouble. But this stagnation was finally and permanently broken by a massive technological leap that we now know as the Green Revolution.
And this brilliantly illustrates the impact of that revolution. Take a look at this political cartoon. You see an Indian farmer proudly sitting on a modern tractor, literally waving off an American who's offering bags of imported wheat. The caption reads, "After Green Revolution, who is interested in your offer?" It's so powerful. Thanks to high-yielding variety seeds, India finally achieved that dream goal of self-reliance, no longer at the total mercy of foreign nations, just to feed its own people.
Now, this Green Revolution happened in two distinct phases. These high-yielding variety, or HYV seeds, were practically miracles for sure, but they were high maintenance. They required strictly correct proportions of expensive fertilizers, pesticides, and super reliable irrigation. Because of that, in the first phase, from the mid-60s to mid-70s, only the more affluent states like Punjab and Andhra Pradesh could even afford the technology, and it mostly just benefited wheat. But then, in the second phase, stretching into the mid-80s, the tech spread out to far more states and a much wider variety of crops.
A huge key to the success of the Green Revolution was something economists call marketed surplus. Think about it. It doesn't really help the broader economy to grow more food if the farmers just eat it all themselves, right? But because these new seeds produce so much extra yield, a massive portion of the crops was suddenly being sold in the markets. This surplus caused the prices of food grains to drop relative to other items. This was a game changer. It immensely benefited low-income groups, and it finally allowed the government to procure enough grains to build up crucial buffer stocks to protect against future shortages.
Which brings us to our final section, Section 6, the Great Subsidy Debate. This massive technological leap wasn't without its own set of risks, because the required inputs for these miracle seeds, like the specific fertilizers and irrigation systems, were so incredibly expensive, only big, wealthy farmers could afford them at first. This risked creating massive inequality all over again, So to counter this, the government stepped in and provided subsidies to help the poorer farmers afford the inputs. And man, did this spark a fierce debate. There are two very clear sides here. On one hand, you have economists arguing that subsidies should be phased out entirely. They point out that the technology is already proven to be profitable now, the subsidies are a massive financial burden on the government, and in reality, a lot of the money just secretly benefits the fertilizer industry and the already rich farmers. But on the flip side, other experts argue that farming in India remains incredibly risky and unpredictable. The vast majority of farmers are still quite poor, and abolishing these subsidies would severely violate that core pillar of equity we talked about, leaving them completely unable to afford basic farming inputs.
Which brings us right back to the core tension at the heart of all nation building. As we reflect on India's wild economic journey from 1950 to 1990, we are left having to confront this really crucial question. Can a nation achieve high growth and modern technology but still somehow leave its own people behind? Balancing growth, modernization, self-reliance, and equity, that is the true, unending challenge of an economy. It is a highly delicate balancing act, and I think it leaves us with plenty to ponder about how we measure the true wealth of our own nations today. Thanks so much for joining me on this explainer, and I'll catch you in the next one.